Today, I'm interviewing Kristen, who is a lactation consultant and pediatric dietitian, to answer all of your questions about milk supply and how to feed your baby. Let's dive right into this because I know there's a lot of moms at home right now worried about their low supply. And if you're watching this and you're like, I don't know how to understand if my supply is at the right level, hopefully this conversation will help ease some fears and give you some direction in what you can do.
So I'm a board certified lactation consultant and a pediatric dietitian. So I work with moms and families with every kind of feeding. So I help babies with any kind of feeding journey that they're on, from breast milk, at the breast, through bottles, pumped milk, formula, even babies with feeding tubes that come home from the NICU. So this is super non-judgmental, very safe space. All kinds of feeding is Any kind of feeding is great for your baby as long as you make an informed decision to have that feeding journey for yourself.
I also feel like my baby was like learning to latch.
Yes.
Is it okay that it hurts at the beginning? Does that mean there's a problem with the latch?
That's a really great question. So yes and no. So we say breastfeeding is not supposed to hurt, and it's really not. However, some discomfort in the beginning is really common for the exact reason that you said, because baby's learning and you're learning too. If it continues or if it is significant. So when I say significant, if you're having actual nipple damage, if you are, bracing yourself for that latch every time, crying, again, it always comes back to seek out help, right? But that is more of a red flag than like some discomfort, a little pinchiness in the beginning. But if we break the latch and start over, get a deeper latch, it's fixed. That may just be part of the learning curve.
What do you think is the most significant time of moms questioning their own milk supply when it is not a concern?
But typically when baby is feeding all the time like that, especially in the early days and weeks postpartum, we call that cluster feeding. And what baby is doing is they're trying to increase your supply up to the mature milk level where we want it for that robust growth and development. And they're coming to breast more frequently because they need to grow, not because your supply is low. So that's probably one of the biggest ways that you can really get in your head during those early days and weeks of cluster feeding, as well as when your milk first comes in or transitions from colostrum to that more higher volume mature milk. That's also one of those times that baby's feeding all the time, and it might be hard for them to latch when your breasts are really hard. That can be a time when moms really think that I must not have milk in there, or I need to pump, or I need to supplement at this time because baby can't get what they need from me.
Okay. If I was trying to figure out what my supply would be, is a good measure to see what I'm pumping. Is that the same as what my baby is getting?
So pumping's never going to be exactly the same as what your baby is getting. If your baby is able to transfer milk efficiently, meaning if they are able to have a good latch and remove milk, they are always going to be more efficient than your pump. And your body always is going to respond better to your baby than to your pump. Your hormones know that that's your baby. So yes, it can be a decent measurement of what's going on, but it's never going to be exactly the same as your baby.
How do you know if you have a low supply or if it's regular?
Yeah, that's a super great question. So I can give you some general kind of red flags or things that we look for when we are concerned about low supply. And it's probably going to surprise you. It's not typically things that you think of, especially if your baby's feeding at the breast, though. This can be on your mind all the time because you can't see what they're getting. And a lot of times we get into our heads that we have to see what they're getting to know how much they're getting. And there's, all these, devices that they make and ways to know how much your baby is getting. But the best way to know what your baby is getting and that you have a robust supply is output of your baby's outputs. What I mean by that are pees, poops, and their weight gain. So we want, for a baby that is beyond a week old, we want at least 6 to 8 wet diapers per day. That tells us they're hydrated. The hydrating milk is also what is nourishing them. So 6 to 8 wet diapers per day. And a couple yellow seedy poops. If you're just getting breast milk, you've probably heard that yellow seedy breast milk poop. It literally looks like that. It's bright yellow and it has little chunks in it. Sounds gross, but it's perfect. That's exactly what we want to see from a breastfed baby. If you're combo feeding, it's going to be a little bit more greenish brown. Also, heads up, we're talking about poop today. the outputs of your baby, those pees and poops, are really the best way to know that your baby is getting what they need and that you have a robust supply. Then after your baby's back to birth weight, we want them to be gaining about an ounce per day until they're about 3 or 4 months old. So that is the rate of weight gain that we're looking at to know if you have a good milk supply. And again, that's when your baby's feeding directly at the breast, so you're not seeing how much they're getting. And that seems super simple, but that is truly the best way to know if you have a good milk supply.
So let's talk about identifying when your supply has dropped. What are some reasons that a supply isn't where it is enough to feed the baby?
Yeah. I think one of the most important times that is super important for parents to know to establish your supply and prevent low supply is actually those first 2 to 4 days after birth. So the importance of expressing milk or stimulating the breast, either by latching your baby, your pump, your hands, in those first 2 to 4 days, truly sets you up for your supply for your entire breastfeeding journey. So if you're not able to do that for some reason, so if you or baby needs medical care, if there's complications after delivery, if you didn't know that you had to express or stimulate the breast in those early days after birth, because nobody tells you that, right? No one tells you that. They just assume that you know. That is a risk factor for low supply. So when you have those first early days after birth, you are telling your body, hey, I'm going to move into lactation. I need this milk for this baby. So that's number one. I think one of the really big ones after that, and this can kind of go hand in hand, if you think you don't have enough milk in the beginning, like your colostrum is small volume and that's what your baby needs. But if you don't know that that's all your baby needs, you might start supplementing. When we supplement unnecessarily, there are absolutely reasons to supplement your baby, even if that reason is just that you want to combo feed, that's fine. But if we supplement because we think we don't have enough milk, we are in turn telling our body we don't need that milk. So baby is not going to take as much at the breast because they're going to be supplemented, which tells your body you don't need as much milk. So that is a situation where we can get ourselves into a low supply. That is an actual time that we can have a decreased supply. I want to just try that. One of the other times that we can have a potential decrease in supply is if for some reason baby is struggling to remove milk from the breast. So if you're having a painful latch, that can be a cue that baby's actually struggling to remove milk. And I think a lot of moms think breastfeeding is supposed to be painful. It's not. Breastfeeding is not supposed to be painful. And pain is not just something that you have to just suffer through because you're the mom and you're going to do this for your baby. And that's wonderful that you want to do that for your baby. But to give you a different perspective, if you're having pain, then baby doesn't have a good latch. And that can make it hard for them to remove milk. If it's hard for them to remove milk, then that is going to decrease your supply. Your body is dependent on efficient milk removal to maintain your supply. So that's another way that we can kind of unknowingly have a decrease in supply if baby's struggling to remove milk. And that's, again, you can think about those outputs, right? Because this all goes together. So if baby's struggling to remove milk, they're probably not going to be having a ton of wet diapers. They're probably not going to be pooping super frequently. So all of those things going together, that those ways that we know we have a good supply may be a little decreased. Baby may be struggling to remove milk. You may be experiencing pain while they're latching. And that could be a cue. Hey, maybe I do have a low supply right now. And then we get to the bottom of it.
Okay. What about if I have a low supply and my baby is still hungry after I have breastfed them? How many ounces should I offer them then? Should I wait?
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways that you can do this. So if baby's still exhibiting hunger cues after you've breastfed them, you can start with an ounce, maybe 2 ounces in a bottle of formula or breast milk. A really good way to handle this, though, is to see a lactation consultant for a weighted feed with your lactation consultant so that you know about how much your baby's taking at breast, or you can get an estimate of about how much to supplement them with afterwards. Sometimes instead of supplementing right after the feed, sometimes we'll make a plan to say, okay, we are going to breastfeed 5 times a day, but then we're going to give 3 full bottles, for example. So instead of breastfeeding and then supplementing and then maybe also pumping to increase your supply, that's triple feeding, and that's really hard and not super sustainable. Maybe we come up with a little bit more of a hybrid plan. So a general amount is super different for every baby. If you know they're getting a decent feed, but still just a little bit hungry, I usually start with an ounce or two and go from there. But the best way to know is to really see a lactation consultant and get a personalized plan of how much to supplement. How do you know when you need to supplement if you have a low supply? That is, of course, a hard question to answer because every baby is so different. However, this should really be a collaborative conversation with your pediatrician, but also a lactation consultant. I think a lot of times we get stuck into this place where the pediatrician's recommending we supplement with formula or with donor milk, but then you miss the lactation support piece. And that is so crucial because we can start supplementing because baby's not gaining adequate weight or they're not having good pees and poops, adequate outputs. And that's great. And that might fix the problem in that moment. But then what's the long-term plan, right? If you want to provide breast milk for your baby, well, we've supplemented and we've started helping that baby gain weight. But what are we doing with the supply? How are we, getting to that place where we don't need to supplement anymore if that's your goal? So it should really be if you need to supplement, typically the reasons are for baby's weight gain, baby's pees and poops, and those kind of go together. And a lot of times when supplementation is recommended, lactation support is just not brought into the conversation. And that might be something you need to ask your pediatrician, like, hey, do you have a lactation consultant here I could see? Or, find someone more commonly, find someone out on your own. I don't like that. More commonly, seek out lactation support to pull into that village of yours to make that collaborative decision. Because we're supplementing, like I said, we fix that problem in the moment, but what's the long-term goal? How do we get you to a place to make it sustainable?
So really quick, you mentioned in that first couple days, what if there are moms out there right now that think they have a low supply and are trying to increase it? Is there hope for them? Can they do it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's kind of two parts to this. So how I said about those early days after birth, that's really what sets you up for your supply. So, and we haven't even talked about like medical reasons for low supply. There are true medical reasons that can contribute hormonally to low supply, anatomically with breast tissue to low supply. If you've had a history of breast surgeries, specifically breast reductions, but none of these things typically, it's very rare to make no milk. None of those things totally mean that you can't make any milk. So those early days are really, really important. And if you had, you needed medical care during those early days or had complications during birth, and you think you have a low supply or you've been told you have a low supply and you're nursing, you're pumping, and you know that those first few days apply to you, that you didn't have the ability to or weren't aware you needed to express milk really frequently during that time. It is still possible with really close support to bring your supply up a bit. It is possible that you may not have a full, robust supply if you were not able to express a ton or stimulate every 2 to 3 hours in those first few days after birth. It is possible that you may not reach a full milk supply, which a full milk supply is only like 25 to 35 ounces per day. It's not 100 ounces per day. That doesn't mean it's not impossible to get it up a little bit, though. It does take a little bit of determination, and not just determination. Everybody doesn't have the same 24 hours, and it takes the support of family or a partner. If you have other children, there are a lot of factors to consider if you're going to be able to do what it needs to bring it up, right? Because you need to sleep too. Now, if you did have those first few days where you were stimulating every 2 to 3 hours, your milk came in, you had a robust supply, and something happened, like where you said with your little one that you had a situation with thrush and you had to switch to pumping and your supply tanked. Or some people, like there's a stomach bug going around and you catch that stomach bug and your supply tanks. Once you have the supply, it does not go away overnight. And that's probably one of the biggest fears that I get from moms is that, oh my gosh, I missed this pump, or I got sick, or my baby slept through the night one time. Is my supply going to go away? It doesn't just go away overnight. You are going to continually stimulate your breast. You are going to keep pumping or keep feeding your baby. your supply comes back. Once you have that supply, you do have to keep stimulating, but it does not go away overnight. It actually takes like 40 days after you wean for that tissue and those cells to go back to non-milk making. So,
Interesting.
yeah, it's like hard, and it's hard to wean without getting mastitis. So that I think is a really important thing for people to understand. If you think your supply's going down, reach out for help. Like there are so many things we can do to help you get your supply back up.
Is that something I can do at home by myself? Because I have a baby scale.
Sorry.
You're good.
Okay. I have so many people ask about doing weighted feeds themselves at home. And I can see why it's really desirable because we want to see how much our baby's getting. But I really, really caution against it for a couple of reasons. So number one, that is so anxiety inducing because there's already so much about our babies that we're constantly analyzing. And if we are trying to analyze exactly how much they're getting at breast every single feed when you're already worried about supply, that's a quick way to just make yourself feel even more overwhelmed. The other thing is that weighted feeds, even for lactation consultants, are only this tiny little snapshot of what's actually going on. So your baby is not taking the same amount at every feed. Your baby is taking what they are hungry for at that time. And remember, your breast milk changes throughout the day in amounts and it changes in composition. So that lower amount, that lower supply volume and that 3 to 10 p.m. hour, your milk during that time is actually fattier. So because it is a lower amount, it actually is higher fat. So they might not take as much of it. So if we do a weighted feed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to get a completely different number than if we did a weighted feed at 8 o'clock in the morning. And again, it's just a snapshot. So I really advise against it for that reason. The other reason is that the scales that your pediatrician and your lactation consultant is going to use to do a weighted feeding are super, super precise. Those are super medical grade scales. And that's going to be way different than the baby scale that you have in your house to look at your baby, to weigh your baby on. Because sometimes you put your baby on the scale and then you breastfeed them and then you put them on again and it's like they're the same weight or it looks like they're less. And that's because babies are wiggly, because those scales are not meant necessarily for milk transfer calculation. So it's really better to not get yourself super caught up on what they're taking exactly precisely in every single feed and really take a step back and look at the whole picture. Are they gaining weight in general? Are they having those good outputs of pees and poops? What's their temperament? Are they happy? Are they consolable? Those are way more important than what baby's taking at every single feed.
What is your advice to people to trust their intuition?
That one is...
Sorry, is that
no.
too leading?
No. I'm trying to think of how... it's not too leading. There's like it's such a hard differentiation between like trusting your intuition and knowing that you know that your baby's healthy, this baby right in front of you is healthy, but also recognizing that there are some things we need to look out for, right? Like those pees, poops, and weight gains. So if the pediatrician or someone is saying, hey, we don't have enough like pee diapers, enough poopy diapers, that's real. That is a concern. But at the same time, if you know that you hear your baby swallowing milk, you can see them feeding really well at the breast, and they are having enough pee and poop diapers, but maybe they're taking a little bit longer to get back to birth weight. That is a place where your intuition comes in, right? That's also a place where a lactation consultant comes in, where you can actually reach out to someone who's focused on your milk supply instead of just looking at the baby in front of them, looking at the whole picture. So that's a tricky question to answer.
And I think what the main message is you don't have to do it alone. Okay, so what if I am not a low supply mom, but I want a combo feed because I have to go back to work, or I want dad to be able to take over feeding? What does that look like?
I love that you brought this up because I think this is such a hot topic of conversation right now. And I think you see it so often on social media and on the internet of like combo feeding. This is how you get your time back and get your sleep and go back to work. And if you want to combo feed your baby, you have every right, and that is your decision to combo feed your baby. Please do not think you can't do that. but you deserve to have the information to make an informed decision to do that. So I think the rhetoric of we can't go back to work if we breastfeed, or I can't get help from my partner if I breastfeed, I can't have somebody else feed the baby if I breastfeed, is really just not true and not fair, because we can do those things if we have support and if we understand how our milk supply works. Because absolutely, you can split shifts in the nighttime with a partner while being a breastfeeding mom without having to use formula if you don't want to. So if you're choosing to combo feed because you think you have to, because you think that breastfeeding doesn't work with going back to work and getting support, please just know that there are absolutely ways to still breastfeed, still get support, still go back to work. That said, everybody doesn't have the same 24 hours, like I said, and everyone deserves to make a decision. So if you know that you don't want to pump at work, you have a really demanding job, and you don't feel like it's going to be feasible, number one, know that if you're in the US, the Pump Act makes it mandatory that your employer has to give you a break and space to express milk throughout the day when you need to. So please know that. But again, I've worked with, I think healthcare professionals are really common. Healthcare professionals and teachers are like the most common profession that have the hardest time pumping, because you can't just like step away. And you want someone to feed formula.
I love that we are supporting parents in however they want to feed their baby. And there's sometimes where you just don't want to pump at work. Your job is so demanding, like you said, and there's so many logistics that go into pumping that combo feeding is the better option all around for specific families.
Mm-hmm.
So, what about your supply? Is your supply going to drop if you start combo feeding and you start skipping a pump? Is that okay?
Yeah. So this is where the answer is probably. So if we're expressing less, we can expect that our body isn't going to make that milk anymore. So your body does not do anything by accident. It takes like 30% of your body's energy to make breast milk. Your brain only takes 20 to 25%. So you are using so much of your energy making breast milk. If your body doesn't think you need it, if you're not stimulating the breast, it's not going to do it. So typically, if we express less, we do make less. But that's okay if your goal is to say, hey, I want to get rid of this pump and I want to combo feed. I want to give formula. So it really is just making that decision of, I really know I don't want to pump here, or I don't want to pump at work, and I'm okay giving formula, but doing those two things is probably going to mean my supply drops. And that's aligned with the goals that you said, right? If the goal is to combo feed and not pump at work. But it is scary to think about that. So there are sometimes ways to maintain supply, but pump less and combo feed, or, just get away from being tied to your pump. Typically a little later in lactation, like I would not suggest doing this in the first 6 weeks, because that's when your supply is kind of getting established. But a lot of times, and it depends on your own body, because everyone can store a different amount of milk in their breast. So everybody is different. But a lot of times we can get you a little stretched out so that, maybe instead of pumping every 3 hours, we can go 4 or 5, maybe even 6, depending on how much you can store in your breasts. So this would be kind of individualized. But if you are going to do this, the best time to stretch out pumping sessions is in the afternoon and evening hours. Your body makes milk in a kind of circadian rhythm. So it peaks between the hours of like 2 and 6 a.m. And then, so overnight, we make the most milk overnight because that's totally fair. Cool. And then it kind of declines as the day goes on, and it hits a low between around 3 and 10 p.m. So if you're going to stretch a pumping time or an expression time, it's best to do it during that time because your breasts don't fill up as quickly. So even though you're getting a little less stimulation, you're not leaving your breasts really full, which number one can increase your risk of mastitis. So we don't want to do that. You don't want to abruptly drop a pumping session. You want to kind of gradually stretch it out. But number two, because your breasts aren't filling up as fast, we're not telling our body, hey, I'm full, I must not need this milk. So absolutely ways to do that. And again, knowing that if you do express less, you probably will make less. But if the goal is to combo feed, that's okay. And again, if you change your mind, you can bring your supply back up by starting to express more again.
So essentially, it's like your body recognizing your baby is getting a little bit older and not needing as much milk, but it's not going to completely get rid of your supply.
Yes, correct. So very similar to as your baby gets older and they need less milk, your body starts making less milk. It really is the same concept. So if you start expressing less, that's really no different than if your baby starts taking less and your body responds.
Okay. I remember all of the charts and graphs of how many ounces my baby was supposed to eat. How do I balance that with combo feeding if I'm breastfeeding and I don't know how much my baby is drinking?
Yeah. So you may have heard like a breastfed baby should never take more than 3 or 4 ounces. And where that comes from is breast milk composition is a little bit different than formula. So breast milk changes even throughout the feed, throughout the day, but definitely with time, as your baby gets older, the fat content increases to give them more calories. So that doesn't happen with formula. Formula is always the same. Volume wise, typically a baby will take more volume of formula than they will of breast milk. So, a really good starting point is about an ounce per hour of the day for either breast milk or formula. This is a starting point. So, what I mean by that is your baby takes in about an ounce to ounce and a quarter, ounce and a half per hour. So, if it's been 3 hours since I've last fed my baby, a good starting point would be 3 ounces. So, that's usually where I tell people to start with either leaving bottles of breast milk or leaving bottles of formula, but recognizing that the more important thing is listening to your baby's cues. So recognizing whether at breast, pumped breast milk, or formula, recognizing those hunger cues, the turning their head, chewing on their hands, starting to wiggle a little bit, getting really clenched and tight. That's a hungry baby. And then as baby gets full, they start to relax their body. They start to not exhibit hunger cues anymore, not turn their head and chew on their hand if we take the bottle away or if we take them off the breast. If they're still exhibiting hunger cues, even if it's 10 or 20 minutes after the bottle, then you offer another ounce, maybe ounce and a half or 2 ounces. And that's really called responsive feeding. So maybe start with the number of ounces. Start with a number of ounces based on how many hours it's been since they last fed. So if it's been 3 hours, start with 3 ounces. Listen to your baby, and maybe they don't even want that whole 3 ounces. If they stop before that, that's okay too. But if they're still hungry, just be okay with giving them a little bit more.
So I've heard the phrase, you can't overfeed a breastfed baby. Can you overfeed a combo fed baby?
Yeah. So theoretically, you can overfeed any baby, but where that comes from is when baby's at breast, their eating pattern is going to be a little bit more intuitive. So baby is going to take theoretically what they're hungry for, and then they're going to stop feeding when they're done. The overfeeding from bottles really comes from our perception of, okay, I put 3 ounces in this bottle, they have to take this 3 ounces. And kind of subconsciously, we're expecting them to take that 3 ounces. And it's not that we're forcing them, but we're kind of expecting that I've given you this 3 ounces, baby's going to take 3 ounces. We don't know what they're taking at breast. So that's where that overfeeding comes from. And that can be with pumped breast milk too. So you can overfeed with pumped breast milk. You can overfeed with combo and formula feeding. However, by pacing their feeds while we're bottle feeding, we can help not overfeed them. And this is really similar to that responsive feeding. So recognizing when they're full. Paced feeding is going to be holding your bottle horizontal. So paced feeding your baby is really holding the bottle horizontal instead of that traditional really tipped up baby leaned back and just kind of guzzling. So holding the bottle horizontal allows baby to latch on and then take breaks. So instead of just guzzle, 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 they're going to latch on, they're going to suck, swallow, suck, suck, swallow, and then maybe take a break. And that horizontal bottle allows them to restart sucking whenever they're ready instead of having gravity pour it into them. That allows them to pace themselves a little bit better, which typically means less overfeeding. And then again, listening to them if they're done. If they come off the bottle, if they're really floppy and relaxed, even if they haven't taken that whole bottle volume, we respect that they're done.
So I want to ask a vulnerable question for anybody who is considering combo feeding. Is it normal to feel guilty about giving your baby formula?
I love that you asked this because I think there's so much talk about this. I keep saying social media, but that's where we get our information these days, right? But there's so much on either side, and there's fed is best and breast is best, but Informed is best. That's the best way to feed your baby. It is so normal to feel guilty if you had this idea in your head of what you thought you wanted to do, or you're hearing all these things, just breastfeed, it's natural, you can do this. Not everyone can. And when I say can, I don't even mean can produce milk. We don't all have the same 24 hours. We don't all have the same life, have the same goals, have the same needs, have the same support. But that doesn't mean you might not feel guilty if you had this idea in your head of what you wanted to do or how you wanted to feed your baby or what people in your life are saying. And your feelings are valid, but that does not mean you are a bad mom. If you make an informed choice to feed your baby formula, or if you have to feed your baby formula because of a low supply or because baby has a medical condition or, the whole list of reasons that babies need formula or you want to feed formula, you are making an informed decision to feed and nourish your baby and love your baby. That does not make you less of a mom. That does not mean that you are harming your baby by making that choice or having to do that. If it comes from a place of low supply, I think that's even more common to feel super guilty because we're, I think our generation is just not really given a lot of breastfeeding information. And it's like, oh, you'll figure it out. You can just do it. Nobody told you how to do it. How are you supposed to know how to do it? And then, if you do have a low supply and you don't know how you got there and you didn't know how to establish your supply in the first place, and then you learn, well, then there's so much guilt that comes with that too. But it is not your fault. We are not just born with this information in our head. It is, we as a system need to do way better in educating and supporting moms in how to do this. But just know that whatever your decision to feed your baby, whatever your needs are, you are making the right decision for your family. And that is the most important thing at the end of the day.
I love that take. And I agree that there is so much discourse around the conversation about how other people are eating and feeding their babies.
Yes.
And really, we just need to be more understanding and compassionate towards everybody taking care of a new human life.
Yes.
Because it is hard. Even if you're not, even if you're exclusively formula feeding your baby, it is still a lot of work.
It's so hard. It is so hard. They just give you this human and they're like, here you go, good luck. And you go home and you're like, what do you mean? No matter how do I do this? Your baby. Yeah. Again, like nobody tells you how to do it either. And if you didn't grow up around kids, like I didn't grow up around babies until I got into my career. And I mean, there's so much to learn. There's so much that nobody tells you. And it's hard no matter what. And we as a society, I think, not just healthcare professionals, lactation consultants, moms, it's not, it is everyone's individual choice how they want to feed their baby. And it's not breast is best, but it's also not fed is best. It's making an informed decision for your family is best. And that at the end of the day is what matters the most.
Is there anything we missed from all of your experience and things that parents ask you over and over again?
I think just one more little point about combo feeding is that there is not one way to combo feed. There's not one way to breastfeed. There's not one way to formula feed. So feeding your baby is not one size fits all. If you want to breastfeed, I think there's not one way to breastfeed. So if you want to breastfeed your baby, it does not mean you have to exclusively nurse your baby, pump every 3 hours for the entire time that you're lactating. You can provide any amount of breast milk to your baby that you want. And I think that is something really beautiful about combo feeding, honestly, that it allows people that may otherwise have said, no, I'm just going to formula feed, to say, oh, I can provide some breast milk. That seems reasonable to me. And still give your baby some breast milk versus, having to choose between exclusively nursing or exclusively formula feeding. And there is this whole middle ground that is so wonderful that allows more babies to get more breast milk and allows you to still have some of whatever that experience looks like to you and make it your own. And so just knowing that there is no one right way to do this. And even like I said, combo feeding, that doesn't have to mean just overnight somebody gives a bottle. It could mean, like you said, if I go back to work and don't or can't fit in those amount of pumps that I need, it allows me to still nurse my baby when I'm home if I want, but combo feed throughout the day. So just know that there's no one right way to do it. And if you want to provide breast milk for your baby, there's almost always a way that we can help you do that. And I think getting support is super important, and knowing that you don't have to wait until there's a problem to see a lactation consultant. We are here for you to help you plan and help you avoid problems and be proactive instead of reactive. And we are not judging you for how you want to feed your baby. No one should be. So we are here for you no matter how you want to feed your baby.
Thank you, Kristen, for being here. And if you would like to hear more from Kristen or find her information, it's down in the description below. And we want to hear about your feeding journey. Help support other moms who are currently in the mix of it by sharing your story down in the comments. And we will see you on the next one.
Thank you.